What happens if a woman believed to be dead in a morgue goes into labor? Tonight, the fine line between life and death completely disappears. Sit back and enjoy watching how the mother and baby's lives are miraculously saved. The cold light in the amphitheater flickered from time to time. The sound of the clock was the only sign that time was still passing. Tick-tock, tick-tock. For Andrés Velázquez, every second was just another step in the same routine of every day, every night. He put on his latex gloves and adjusted the mask on his face. The strong smell of chemicals permeated the air, but he no longer noticed it. It had long since ceased to affect him. His nose had grown accustomed to the smell. Andrés crossed the long hallway with firm steps, the sound of his shoes echoing on the white tile floor. His colleagues, who were still there, gave him a slight nod, but no one tried to strike up a conversation. They knew it was useless. Andrés only spoke when necessary, and even when he did speak, his voice always sounded the same, calm, low, emotionless. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt anything real. Maybe it was that day, the day that destroyed everything, the day he found the body of his younger brother, Mateo, lying in a dirty alley, as if he were trash. The memory hit him like a punch in the stomach, but he was already used to that pain. He carried it with him every day, like a shadow that never left him. Something inside him died that day. Mateo was different from him. He was light, always smiling, always believing in people. Andrés, on the other hand, was always more serious, more closed off, but Mateo made him laugh, made him believe that maybe life wasn't just an unfair game where the good guys always lose. And then Mateo died. His life was taken from him for no reason, without explanation. The police recorded it as an unsolved crime and moved on. But Andrés couldn't go on. He screamed. He fought. He demanded justice, but the world didn't care. Nobody cared, and he realized that fighting against it was useless. That's how he became who he is today. Cold, methodical, precise. Death was the only thing that made sense. Now the dead didn't lie. They didn't betray. They didn't hide secrets. And he devoted himself to them. He stopped in front of one of the metal drawers that was still open. The body had just arrived. It hadn't even been 4 minutes. A body covered by a white sheet lay there. He took the board and read the information with the same impassive expression as always. Woman, young. She was found unconscious in a dark alley in the downtown area of the city. She was taken to the hospital, but the doctors pronounced her dead before attempting to resuscitate her. The police suspected an overdose, yet another one. Nothing out of the ordinary in that city where death spread without warning, taking lives as if they were dry leaves in the wind. He sighed, held the edges of the cloth, and with a single movement revealed the young woman's face. And then something inside him wavered. She didn't look like an addict. She had no needle marks on her arms. Her skin was clean, without the wounds common to hard drug users. Her face was delicate, serene. If it weren't for the coldness of her body and her accentuated pallor, he could have sworn she was just sleeping. Her half-open lips seemed about to let out a sigh. Her long eyelashes cast soft shadows on her cheeks. He forced his mind back to the facts. He had to concentrate on his work. It wasn't the first time he had seen a young body like this. Death did not choose age, but there was something about her that made him feel strangely uncomfortable. He scanned the rest of the body and stopped at her abdomen. He felt a chill. It was the first time he had ever found a pregnant woman dead. He set the board aside and gently touched her belly. The skin, though cold, had the shape of a very advanced pregnancy, if not almost full term. Shit, he muttered to himself. The body of a pregnant woman. Something was very wrong here. He opened the reports that accompanied the body. There weren't many details, only that the police had been called by a neighbor who found her lying unconscious, her clothes covered in dust, and a small spot of blood at the corner of her mouth. She appeared to be alone, with no signs of violence, and no witnesses who had seen what happened before. Andrés closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push away the discomfort growing inside him. He knew he shouldn't get attached. The work was mechanical, cold, but at that moment he couldn't ignore the question echoing in his mind. Who was that woman? And more importantly, who left her there to die while she was pregnant? Valeria Torres. That was the name they found on the few documents she had with her. He looked at her face once more. Her pale skin, delicate features, lips slightly parted. If he didn't know she was dead, he could have sworn she was just sleeping. He took a deep breath, trying to push away that strange feeling. He felt his stomach tighten. Andrés closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push that uneasiness to the back of his mind. He needed to start the autopsy. He needed to do his job. But as he held the scalpel, he realized that his hands were steadier than usual. It was as if something inside him was screaming, only he didn't know what. He positioned the blade against Valeria's cold skin. For a moment, he paused. The tip of the scalpel touched her abdomen right in the center, where her rounded belly indicated that she was carrying a life she would never know. The cold metal against the colorless skin made him hold his breath, and then he made the first cut. And it was at that moment that everything changed. Her body contracted. It wasn't a simple spasm. It wasn't an involuntary movement, as sometimes happened with corpses. It was something different. Andrés's eyes widened. The knife slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a sharp sound. Valeria moaned. It was a faint sound, almost a sigh, but it was real. Andrés's heart raced, and he took a step back, feeling pain throughout his body. His mind tried to understand, to find a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. She was alive. My God. His voice came out almost as a whisper. His muscles trembled again. Her eyelids twitched as if she were struggling to wake up. Andrés quickly leaned over her, placed 2 fingers on her neck, and gently pressed her cold skin. There was a weak, slow pulse, almost disappearing, but it was there. She was alive. The impact ran through every part of Andrés's body. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of his thoughts. How was that possible? She had been declared dead at the hospital, brought there with no signs of life. But at that moment, before his eyes, the impossible was happening. The young woman he was about to dissect was still breathing, and then he heard it. A muffled sound, faint but real, came from her belly. Andrés's heart was pounding. His gaze went straight to Valeria's abdomen. The liquid was spreading across the metal table. For a moment, he couldn't move. His jaw tensed. His hands were shaking. The scalpel slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor with a sharp thud. The impact ran through his back like an electric shock. His brain was trying to understand, but his instinct already knew the answer. "No," he whispered, almost without a voice. His eyes were fixed on Valeria's belly, small tremors, as if something were pushing from within. Time seemed to slow down. 1 second, 2. Then reality hit him like a punch in the chest. She was going into labor, and if he didn't do something now, mother and child could die before his eyes. He swallowed hard, trying to stave off panic. His eyes darted around the room. He was alone in the room. He had nothing prepared. No proper equipment, no incubator, no nurse, no obstetrician. For a second, the memory of Mateo flashed through his mind. His brother lying on the cold floor, with no one to save him. The despair he felt that day exploded inside him. He couldn't let another life slip away before his eyes. "I need help here," he shouted loudly. His voice echoed through the morgue. Firmly, urgently, he ran to the door and shouted even louder. "Someone help me! She's alive! The baby is coming!" The sound of hurried footsteps came down the hall. Echoes of confused voices. Andrés returned to Valeria, his eyes analyzing every detail. His face was contorted with pain. His forehead glistened with sweat. His fingers trembled slightly on her belly, feeling every contraction. The baby was struggling to be born, and he had to do something. Now the door burst open. 2 doctors and a nurse rushed in, their gowns still somewhat disheveled. One of them, Dr. Ramirez, looked at the scene with wide eyes. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice was full of astonishment. Nurse Clara put her hand to her mouth when she saw Valeria writhing on the steel table. Her face was pale, her hair stuck to her sweaty forehead. Her breathing was rapid and ragged. She's dead," one of the doctors stammered. "She's not anymore," Andrés replied in a firm voice, but full of adrenaline. Without wasting any more time, he took off his own gown and put it over Valeria's body, trying to cover at least part of her cold skin. "The contractions are strong," he said, as he gently pressed her belly with both hands. His movements were firm, careful, attentive to every sign, and then he felt it. "She's fighting to be born," he murmured. The other doctors remained paralyzed, trying to understand the absurdity of the situation. Andrés looked up angrily. "Don't just stand there. We have to get this baby out now." That seemed to break the bubble of shock they were in. Clara ran to get sheets and compresses. Dr. Ramirez took gloves out of his pocket and began to put them on quickly. The other doctor, still trembling, went to get the few pieces of equipment available in the morgue. Andrés looked at Valeria again. She was so weak. Each breath seemed like an immense effort. He leaned over her slightly and spoke softly, almost as if trying to call her back. "Valeria, can you hear me?" She was still there, still fighting. Andrés swallowed, looked at the other doctors, then at Valeria's belly, which was contracting more and more. Valeria's face was even paler, almost transparent. Sweat was running down her forehead, but her body was cold. Each breath was short, as if the air wasn't reaching her lungs completely. Her chest rose and fell slowly with difficulty. Andrés pressed 2 fingers against her neck, trying to feel the faint heartbeat, so faint that he had to concentrate to notice it was still there. His stomach churned. There was no time. "She's very weak." His voice came out tense. The other doctors exchanged worried glances. Nurse Clara swallowed hard. "What do we do? Do we take her to the operating room?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez quickly examined Valeria's body, analyzing the contractions that were becoming increasingly intense. "There's no time. If we don't act now, we're going to lose them both," he said firmly. Andrés felt a lump in his throat. 2 hearts were beating inside that body, one already fading away, the other struggling to be born. His mind was racing. He tried to think of all the possibilities. A natural birth there, in that state, was impossible. Valeria had no strength. The baby was in a difficult position. "We have to get it out now," he said without hesitation. The other doctors nodded. There was no time. Just preparing the stretcher and bringing it in would take too long. There was no operating room ready. There was only that cold morgue. A mother fighting for her life without knowing it, and a baby trying to be born. Andrés had never delivered a baby, never needed to. His experience had always been linked to death, not life. But now, at that moment, none of that mattered. He swallowed hard and looked at the other doctors. "We're going to perform a C-section right here," he said firmly. Dr. Ramirez opened his eyes in surprise. "Are you crazy? We don't have anesthesia. We don't have anything. What if we don't do it now?" Andrés held his gaze. "They're going to die." There was a moment of silence, a heavy silence, full of fear, full of doubt. But deep down, they all knew he was right. Clara ran to get more gauze and instruments. Andrés quickly washed his hands, took a deep breath, and picked up the scalpel. His fingers were trembling, but he couldn't hesitate. His eyes went to Valeria. She didn't have the strength to open her eyes, but she was still there. She was still fighting. "Hold her down," he asked. 2 doctors stood on either side of her body, ready to stabilize her. The air felt heavy. Andrés placed a hand on Valeria's cold skin. He felt the contractions still present, and then made the first cut. The scalpel slid through, cutting a precise path. Warm blood began to flow, and he quickly wiped it away with gauze. His heart was beating so hard that he felt like his chest was going to explode. "Are you doing it right?" Clara whispered, trying to stay calm. The seconds felt like hours. Andrés made the second cut, opening the next layer, and then he saw it. The tiny body was there, fragile, diminutive, struggling to come out. "I see it," he exclaimed, his voice full of adrenaline. Carefully, he slid his hands inside and held the baby. He needed strength and delicacy at the same time. Any mistake could hurt him. The silence was suffocating. Andrés pulled the baby out, and for a second, everything stopped. There he was. But he wasn't crying. Andrés felt his chest tighten. His gaze met Clara's, who already had tears in her eyes. "He needs to breathe." Andrés's heart was pounding. With his hands still stained with blood, he turned the baby over. He quickly cleared his airways and, without thinking twice, patted him on the back. "Come on, little one, come on." And then the sound everyone was waiting for. The loud, high-pitched cry, breaking the silence of the morgue. The baby was alive. Clara brought her hands to her face. Dr. Ramirez let out a heavy sigh. The other doctors seemed in shock. But Andrés felt something different, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He held that little being in his hands, looking at his fragile, wrinkled face. Life, for the first time in years. He wasn't just facing death, he had just brought someone into the world. For a moment, no one moved. Andrés stood still, holding that tiny being in his hands, feeling the fragile warmth of its skin against his gloved fingers. Its chest rose and fell rapidly. Its wrinkled little face was red from the effort of its first cry. Its tiny arms moved in the air as if trying to cling to the world. Everyone around seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Clara brought her hands to her face, her eyes filled with tears. Dr. Ramirez closed his eyes for a moment and released the air trapped in his lungs, as if he were assimilating the weight of what had just happened. The other doctor leaned against the wall with his knees shaking, as if the impact had not yet worn off. Against all expectations, against all that seemed impossible, he was there, fighting, breathing, crying loudly. Andrés felt a lump in his throat. It was an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. His eyes turned to Valeria, who remained motionless. She was still there, but for how long? Her chest, which had been rising and falling with difficulty, was now still, without movement, without sound. Andrés didn't need to check the monitors to know. He knew her heart had stopped. No, the word escaped his lips before he could think. He moved instinctively, placing the baby in the arms of Nurse Clara and throwing himself on Valeria, pressing 2 fingers against her neck, desperate to feel any heartbeat. But there was nothing. Dr. Ramirez understood what was happening in that very moment. Quick, we need to resuscitate her. The other doctor brought the defibrillator. Andrés tore the cloth covering her chest, revealing cold, lifeless skin. Charging! Someone shouted. Andrés looked at Valeria. Her face was so calm, so serene, as if she were simply drifting off to sleep. Mateo had been like that too, when he found him. A shock ran through Valeria's body, causing her arms and legs to contract. Again, another shock. Andrés's heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He tried to cling to logic, to his training, to everything he had learned in his years as a doctor, but none of that mattered. "Don't do this to me now," he whispered, pressing his hands against her chest and beginning chest compressions. Nurse Clara hurriedly wiped away her tears while the other doctor prepared another charge on the defibrillator. "Come on, Valeria." Andrés's voice came out shaky. Sweat trickled down his face. His arms ached from pressing so hard on her chest, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything. The baby continued to cry as if something was wrong. Panic grew inside Andrés, and for the first time in a long time, he felt real fear. A suffocating, desperate fear. The same fear he felt when he held Mateo for the last time. "Come on, Valeria. Fight!" His voice broke. The sound of the heart monitor was a deafening silence. Nothing. No sign of life. Valeria's chest was still, without any movement. Her skin was as cold as the steel of the table where she lay. But Andrés wasn't going to accept that. Despair washed over him like a violent storm. The world around him disappeared, and only Valeria existed. "No!" he shouted, the sound echoing in the morgue. He pressed his hands against her chest and began to resuscitate her with more force. "You're not going to die, Valeria. Do you hear me?" His body was shaking, but he didn't stop. "You fought to get here. You can't leave now." Clara cried softly, while Dr. Ramirez looked at Andrés with a mixture of shock and sadness. The other doctor looked away as if he already knew the outcome. But Andrés didn't know how to give up. No, after all, every time he pressed her chest, he felt his desperation grow. He couldn't lose her. He wouldn't let another life slip away before his eyes. Mateo, the image of his brother came to him like a sharp knife, his smiling face, the hopeful look he once had, the last time he saw him, lifeless, without answers. Andrés felt his throat close up. Tears burned in his eyes. "Valeria, please come back." He pressed her chest again, one more time, and then, amid the chaos, a faint sound, a sigh. Her breathing returned, slow, fragile. but it returned. He held the air in his lungs, afraid to move, afraid that it was all just an illusion. But then, very slowly, her eyelashes fluttered. Her eyes opened just a little, as if she were trying to return from a deep sleep. "Valeria," Andrés whispered, almost unable to believe it. Her lips trembled. A low sound escaped from her mouth, a faint, weak murmur. Andrés leaned closer, trying to understand what she was saying. "What, Valeria? Say it again." But her voice was just a sigh, a word without sound, without form. And then, before he could say anything else, her eyes closed again. Her chest was still rising and falling slowly. She was alive, weak, struggling, but alive. Andrés closed his eyes for a second and let out a long sigh, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. "My God," Clara whispered beside him, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Ramirez ran his hand over his forehead, exhausted. The baby continued to cry softly, as if somehow sensing that her mother was still there. Andrés looked at Valeria again. He didn't know what she had said. He didn't know if she would wake up again. But for now, that didn't matter. She was still here, and that was all that mattered. The baby was wrapped in a white blanket, small and fragile, but breathing. Her little arms moved slightly, her eyes still closed to the world. Clara held the child carefully, as if afraid of hurting her. "We need to take her to the UC and neonatal unit," said the nurse, her voice trembling. Andrés looked at the baby and felt something strange in his chest, a knot, a feeling he couldn't name. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to regain control. He still hadn't processed everything that had happened. Clara walked toward the door, but she hesitated. "Do you want to hold him?" The question took Andrés by surprise. He opened his mouth to answer, but remained silent. He looked at the baby again, now calmer, resting in the nurse's arms. He felt an almost uncontrollable desire to hold him, but he couldn't. He didn't know how. "No," he said quietly. "Just take him to the incubator as quickly as possible. He needs urgent care." Clara nodded and hurried out, leaving silence in the place where seconds ago the baby's cries could be heard. Andrés turned his gaze to Valeria. She was alive, but she wasn't waking up. After resuscitation, her vital signs had stabilized. Her breathing was better. Her heart was beating at a more steady rhythm, but she was still there, motionless, lost in a deep sleep from which no one knew if she would wake up. The other doctors had done everything they could. Now all that was left was to wait. But Andrés couldn't accept that. The morgue was a mess. Dried blood on the table, gauze scattered about, scalpels on the floor. Everything there told the incredible story of that night. But even after so much chaos, the hospital was already returning to its routine. Except for him, Andrés couldn't leave. He needed to understand. He needed to know who that woman was. He took the few papers that came with her. Name, Valeria Torres. No contact information, no medical history, just the cold, empty information that she had been found unconscious in an alley and pronounced dead. But why? What happened to her that night? Andrés closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't know who Valeria was, but he knew he wouldn't rest until he found out. Determined, he walked to the hospital reception desk. The place was still bustling with activity. Doctors coming and going, nurses attending to patients, life going on as if nothing had happened. But for Andrés, everything felt different. He stopped in front of the counter and looked at the receptionist who was organizing some papers. "I need to see the medical file of the patient, Valeria Torres." The woman looked up, somewhat surprised. "The girl from the morgue is alive," he replied, without the patience for lengthy explanations. "And I need any information that will help me understand what happened to her. Can you look up her name for me?" The receptionist looked around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "I shouldn't give you this without authorization." Andrés leaned in a little closer. "Please." The tone of his voice made the woman hesitate. Finally, she sighed and began typing on the computer. After a few seconds, her expression changed. "This doesn't make sense." "What?" She turned the screen so he could see. "Valeria Torres was reported missing 2 months ago." Andrés frowned. 2 months? Yes. They said she disappeared suddenly. Her mother filed a report, but the police found nothing. The case went cold, and no one else looked for her. A chill ran down his spine. If she had been missing for so long, where had she been? Who had kept her away from everything and everyone? Andrés clenched his fists. Valeria didn't get there by chance. The hospital was quiet at that hour. The lights in the hallways flickered from time to time, casting shadows on the white walls. Andrés walked slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the last few hours. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't stop. He still couldn't understand how it had all happened. How Valeria, who had been missing for 2 months, ended up in that alley, presumed dead. How a baby fought to be born in a morgue, in the cold and darkness. His footsteps echoed on the floor until he stopped in front of the door to the neonatal unit. He took a deep breath before entering. Inside, the temperature was different, warmer, as if the environment itself was trying to protect those little beings who were still learning to breathe on their own. And then he saw it, the small incubator, in the corner of the room. The baby was there, surrounded by wires and machines that monitored every detail of its breathing. So small, so fragile. Andrés approached slowly, not quite sure what he was doing there. He had never cared about a patient more than necessary, never gotten involved. But now, seeing that baby, something inside him changed. He slowly raised his hand and touched the glass of the incubator with his fingertips. He felt a lump in his throat, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. The last time he felt that was when he held Mateo for the last time. The same lump in his throat, the same fear. Mateo was also small when he left. He was also torn from the world without a chance to fight. Andrés closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push the memory away. When he opened them again, he looked at the baby inside, breathing with difficulty, but alive. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to feel. He just knew he couldn't leave. No, this time something was holding him back. Maybe it was the feeling that this child had no one, but that was about to change. The sound of hurried footsteps caught his attention. Across the hall, a police officer was walking alongside a tired-looking woman. Her gray hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her simple clothes showed that she was not a woman of means. But what caught Andrés's attention most was her expression, her despair, her sunken eyes, red from crying, her heavy breathing, as if she had run all the way there. "Where is my daughter?" Her voice came out shaky. "Please, where is my little girl?" Clara approached her, trying to calm her down. "Doña Rosa, we're going to take you to her, but you need to breathe. I don't want to see her now." The woman almost fell to her knees. They said she was dead. Then they said she wasn't. I don't understand anything anymore. Andrés felt a lump in his throat. Doña Rosa, Valeria's mother, was shaking from head to toe as if she were holding herself up to keep from collapsing. He stepped forward. "Señora Rosa, I'm Dr. Andrés. Your daughter is alive, but she's still unconscious. We're doing everything we can." Her eyes filled with tears. "She's really alive." Andrés took a deep breath. "Yes." Doña Rosa's legs buckled, and she leaned against the wall, covering her face with her hands. A sob escaped her mouth, the muffled cry of someone who has suffered too much. "I thought I'd never see her again." It took her a few seconds to catch her breath, and then she looked around. "And the baby? Where is her baby?" Andrés looked at the incubator next to him. Doña Rosa followed his gaze, and when she saw the little one sleeping inside, she brought her hands to her chest. "My God, my grandson!" Her voice broke. Tears fell uncontrollably. Andrés remained silent, just watching. That baby was no longer alone, and Valeria had someone waiting for her. The door to the room opened slowly. The place was silent, lit only by the soft light coming from the hallway. The sound of heart monitors filled the space, each beat marking the fragile line between life and death. Valeria was there, lying in bed, so pale, so fragile. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Each breath seemed like a struggle. The wires connected to her body were a reminder that she was not yet free, not yet safe. Doña Rosa entered slowly. Her steps were hesitant, as if she were afraid of breaking the moment. In her eyes, a mixture of relief and pain. Her face was still marked by tears, her hands trembling. She approached the bed, and with all the care in the world, took her daughter's hand in hers. Her wrinkled fingers, hardened by time and hard work, caressed Valeria's cold skin. A sob escaped her throat. "My girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My God." I thought I would never see you again." Tears fell silently. She squeezed her daughter's hand tighter, as if trying to keep her in the world of the living. "I promised I would take care of you." Her voice broke. "Forgive me, daughter." Her shoulders shook, the weight of a guilt that only mothers understand. Andrés watched from afar. Something inside him cringed, as if every word that woman uttered struck him directly in the chest. He swallowed hard. He felt a lump in his throat, the kind that suffocates you, that makes your chest feel heavy. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away from the scene. Maybe because deep down he knew what it was like to lose someone you love. And maybe, just maybe, he was afraid it would happen again. Doña Rosa continued to hold her daughter's hand, her fingers squeezed lightly, as if she feared Valeria would disappear if she let go. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with feelings that could not be explained with words alone. Andrés watched everything standing by the door. He knew that this woman had a lot to say. And when Doña Rosa finally looked up at him, there was something in her eyes that mixed pain, fear, and a silent plea for help. She took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. But when she began to speak, her voice came out trembling. "My daughter, my little girl. She didn't deserve any of this." She looked at Valeria, her eyes filled with tears. She was so full of life. She was always a good girl, dedicated. She loved teaching music to the neighborhood children. She never got into trouble. But then he showed up. Andrés frowned. "Who?" Doña Rosa looked down, as if she were afraid to say the name. "That damn Samuel, that bastard." The name came out of her mouth like poison. Andrés felt a chill. Something in her tone of voice made him understand before she continued that this was not just a case of a relationship that ended badly. Doña Rosa took another deep breath and spoke softly, as if afraid that someone would hear her. "That man is dangerous. The whole neighborhood is afraid of him. He hangs out with drug dealers, has dirty money, always gets his way. My daughter never wanted anything to do with him, but one day he drugged her at a party." The woman's hand squeezed Valeria's even tighter. She didn't even know what had happened. She only found out later, when she was already expecting the baby. Andrés felt his blood boil. He did that to her, and got away with it. Doña Rosa shook her head, anger and helplessness in her eyes. Valeria wanted to report him, but no one wanted to mess with him, and even the police did nothing. They told her to get rid of the baby and forget about it. Silence filled the room. Doña Rosa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears. When those bandits found out she was pregnant, they started threatening her. Andrés frowned. Why? She opened her eyes. Fear reflected on her face. Because that child is proof of their crime. The air became heavy. Andrés felt a lump in his throat. Valeria wasn't just running away. She was trying to survive, and someone wanted to make sure she didn't. Knowing that made his stomach churn. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to take it all in. The police found Valeria unconscious in some alleyway. They said it was an overdose. They took her to the hospital, and the doctors simply gave up. They declared her dead, without even trying to understand. And then she ended up in the morgue, on his table. His chest tightened. If he hadn't hesitated, if he had continued with the autopsy without questioning it, he would have made the cut. He would have killed a living woman, a woman who had already been abandoned to die, thrown away as if she were worthless, just another nameless body in the city. The billy rose in his throat. He felt a chill, a suffocating weight on his chest. He ran his hands over his face, trying to push the thought away, but it was still there. She survived for seconds because of her instinct, because of the doubt that made him stop at just the right moment. Andrés took a deep breath and looked at Valeria. She was there, breathing, fighting, but still on the edge of the abyss. And he knew that as long as she remained like that, as long as she couldn't tell her own story, the danger wasn't over. Samuel wanted to erase her from the world, and if he had already tried once, he would try again. The hospital was plunged into the silence of the early morning. Andrés sat next to Valeria's bed, with his elbows resting on his knees and his hands clasped together. He couldn't sleep, despite his exhaustion. The weight of that night kept him awake. He looked at Valeria, motionless, her face serene, as if she were in a deep sleep. Next to her, her mother held her hand, murmuring prayers in a low voice. The baby was safe in the ICU, surrounded by the care of the nurses. Everything seemed calm, but Andrés knew that danger was still near. And then the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. He turned just in time to see a police officer approaching. The man looked agitated, his eyes alert. Dr. Andrés stood up immediately. "What happened?" The police officer took a deep breath before speaking. "We caught a man trying to force his way into the hospital. He was looking for a patient." Andrés's stomach churned. "Who?" The police officer looked at him for a moment before saying the name. "Samuel." Andrés's blood ran cold. He felt his whole body tense up, his fists clenching automatically. "He's in custody." "Yes." But he didn't say anything. He wasn't armed. He didn't resist. He just stood there waiting to be taken away. Andrés felt a chill run down his spine. Samuel didn't need to act on impulse. Men like him always had a plan. He looked at Valeria, still vulnerable in that bed. She wasn't safe, and he knew Samuel wouldn't give up so easily. He looked at Valeria. Her face was so serene, so fragile, but he knew the hell she had been through. He knew that if it were up to Samuel, she would never have woken up in that bed. And then his eyes went to the baby, so small, so helpless inside that incubator, unaware that someone wanted to erase him from the world before he could even give his first smile. Andrés's heart tightened. It was as if an old wound had opened up inside him. The weight of Mateo's loss came back with a vengeance. The same feeling of helplessness, the same emptiness. He still remembered his younger brother laughing with that sweetness full of life. And then he found him lifeless in an alley, cold, alone, with no one having done anything for him. And now Valeria and her baby were in the same situation. Someone wanted them dead. Someone had thrown them away to die in oblivion. But this time, Andrés would not let history repeat itself. He would not let Samuel win. He would protect those two with every ounce of strength he had left inside him. The hallway of the police station smelled of cold coffee and old paper. Andrés walked with firm steps, feeling his heart beating hard in his chest. The air around him felt heavy, as if the very atmosphere knew that something was about to explode. He stopped in front of the cell. On the other side of the bars, sitting calmly on a wooden bench, was Samuel. His dark eyes sparkled with amusement when he saw Andrés approaching, as if it were all a game. "So, you're the little hero doctor," Samuel said with a smirk. Andrés didn't respond immediately, just stared at him. The man in front of him didn't seem nervous. He didn't seem afraid. On the contrary, his gaze was that of someone who knew he wouldn't be there for long. Andrés's stomach churned. "You tried to kill her." His voice came out firm, but full of rage. Samuel tilted his head, feigning confusion. "I didn't do anything." Hatred rose in Andrés's chest like fire. "You drugged Valeria, abused her, chased her, left her to die in that alley." Samuel smiled, his eyes shining with malice. "And what are you going to do about it, doctor? Hit me? Threaten me? Do you think you can save everyone?" He leaned forward a little more, like a predator toying with its prey. "Were you able to save yourself?" The words hit Andrés like a punch. He froze for a second, feeling the blood drain from his face, because he knew what Samuel was talking about. Mateo, his brother's face, appeared in his mind like a ghost, the smile of an innocent child, eyes full of life, and then the memory of his lifeless body lying on the cold ground. Andrés's chest tightened in a way that almost suffocated him. Samuel smiled more. "Do you think you can stop me? Do you think you can protect her and the baby?" He laughed briefly. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Andrés felt his fists clench so tightly that his nails dug into his skin. The hatred inside him was like a volcano about to explode, but then something inside him made him stop. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, his expression had changed. He wouldn't let anger consume his reason, because that was what Samuel wanted. But Andrés wasn't going to play his game. His younger brother's face appeared so clearly that for a moment the noise around him disappeared. He was no longer standing in front of Samuel. He had gone back to the past. It was a sunny afternoon. He and Mateo were playing in the yard of their grandmother's house. His brother had just fallen off his bike, his knee scraped, his eyes filled with tears. Andrés, although only a few years older, crouched down beside him and cleaned the wound with a piece of cloth. "Does it hurt?" he asked. Matteo sniffed and shook his head a little. Andrés smiled and ruffled his hair. You're strong. Everything will be okay. Matteo looked at him with those big, bright eyes, full of trust. You always take care of me, Andrés. The memory hit him so hard that Andrés felt like he couldn't breathe. Matteo always trusted him, always believed that he would protect him from everything. But when his brother needed him most, he wasn't there. Now Valeria and the baby needed him, and he wouldn't make the same mistake. He exhaled slowly and loosened his fists. The rage was still burning inside him, but for the first time, he realized that rage wasn't what would win this fight. It was the promise he couldn't keep to Matteo. Samuel wanted to provoke him. He wanted him to lose control. If Andrés let the fury take over, if he took justice into his own hands, he would be no different from the monsters who destroyed lives without a second thought. But revenge wouldn't save anyone. It wouldn't bring Matteo back. And above all, it wouldn't ensure that Valeria and her son were safe. He took a deep breath and looked at Samuel once more. The man was still smiling, still challenging him as if he were sure he would soon be out of that cell. But Andrés would not allow it. Laugh now if you want, Samuel. His voice came out firm, without any doubt. But this time you're not going to escape. Samuel raised his eyebrows, feigning indifference. And what are you going to do, little doctor? Andrés took a step back. His gaze no longer held hatred, but determination. I'm going to make sure you never touch her or the baby again, and that you stay locked up forever. Do you know what they do to people like you in prison? He turned and left, leaving Samuel behind. He could still hear the man's mocking laughter echoing in the cell, but that didn't matter anymore, because this time, Andrés wasn't going to lose. This time he would protect those who could still be saved. The days passed in a blur. The hospital continued its routine. Doctors and nurses came and went. Patients arrived and left. But for Andrés, everything seemed to stand still. His attention was always in two places: the intensive care unit and the neonatal unit, where Valeria's baby was still struggling to grow strong, and the room where she lay motionless, connected to the machines that kept her body functioning. Meanwhile, the police finally began to piece things together. Samuel's name was not unknown. He was a drug dealer involved in money laundering, threats, and mysterious disappearances. But no one had ever found enough evidence to lock him up. This time was different. The police investigating Valeria's case managed to connect Samuel to old crimes. Witnesses who had previously remained silent out of fear began to speak up. The authorities now had a real reason to keep him in prison. The baby's DNA and the police report, made almost 8 months earlier, would be judged. Andrés should have felt relieved, but he couldn't, because Valeria still hadn't woken up. He went into her room every day, always hoping to see her open her eyes. But nothing changed. The same silence, the same slow breathing, the same serene face that hid the battle she was still fighting inside. He took a chair and sat down next to her, holding her cold hand, trying to ignore the feeling of helplessness. You won, Valeria, he would say, hoping that somehow she could hear him. He's in prison. Your baby is fine. Now all we need is you. But the only response he received was the constant sound of the heart monitor. He used to spend his days surrounded by the coldness of the bodies in the morgue, accustomed to dealing only with the silence of death. Now his hours were divided between visits to Valeria's room and trips to the neonatal ICU, where a tiny being was struggling to grow and live. The baby was getting stronger. Little by little, the doctors reduced the equipment, allowing him to breathe better on his own. Every small achievement was celebrated by the nurses who cared for him. But Andrés just watched from a distance. He didn't know exactly why, but he felt trapped there. He always found a way to pass by the ICU, look through the glass, and see that little sleeping being. And then, one day, Clara approached him with a kind smile. Are you ready to hold him? Andrés blinked, a little surprised. Me, yes. You've been here every day. I think you deserve this moment. He looked at the baby. At first, he thought about rejecting the idea. He had never held a newborn before. He never knew how to hold something so small and fragile. But when Clara carefully placed the baby in his arms, something changed. The warmth of her soft skin, the light weight against his chest, her calm breathing. Andrés held his breath. The baby moved a little, settling into his arms, as if recognizing that contact. And then something inside Andrés broke. A knot tightened in his chest. An unfamiliar but intense feeling. For so long he had lived in the coldness of indifference, in the harshness of a world without feelings. But now he felt something different. The ice surrounding his heart began to melt. He looked at the baby, so small, so innocent, and for the first time in years, he felt the desire to truly protect someone. Days turned into weeks. Doña Rosa never left her daughter alone. She sat by the bed, held her hand, and talked to her as if Valeria were going to open her eyes and respond at any moment. Andrés wanted to believe that, but time passed, and his anguish grew, until one quiet morning, something changed. Andrés was checking her vital signs as he always did. The room was silent. Sunlight streamed gently through the window. Doña Rosa was asleep on the couch, exhausted after another night at her daughter's side, when a faint sound broke the silence. "Where am I?" Andrés froze. His heart stopped for a second. He turned slowly and saw her. Valeria's eyes were open, weak, confused, blinking in the light. Her voice came out almost as a whisper, her mouth dry, as if she had awakened from a very long sleep. Doña Rosa woke up with a start, and when she saw her daughter, she covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "Valeria, my daughter." She jumped up and took her daughter's face in her hands, trembling with emotion. Andrés felt such relief that he had to exhale slowly. Valeria had returned. After so long, after so much struggle, she had finally returned. "My girl, you're back." Her voice trembled with emotion. Valeria blinked several times, as if trying to remember what had happened. Her gaze shifted from her mother to Andrés, who was watching everything in silence, his arms crossed, his face serious, but with a different gleam in his eyes. That's when she noticed it. Across the room was a small incubator. Her chest tightened. An unfamiliar fear grew inside her, as if her heart were about to stop. With effort, she turned her face toward Andrés. "My son." Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper, laden with fear and hope. Andrés held her gaze for a moment before smiling slightly. "He's waiting for you." Valeria's eyes instantly filled with tears. She didn't know what had happened to him. She didn't know how he had gotten there, but at that moment, none of that mattered. Her baby was alive, and she had to see him. Clara entered the room with careful steps, carrying a small bundle in her arms. The nurse looked at Andrés before speaking, as if asking for permission. He just gave a slight nod. "Valeria." Clara approached slowly. "He's fine, strong. He fought hard to be here." Valeria didn't blink. Her eyes were fixed on that tiny being. "Hey, I can do it." Clara smiled and, with all the delicacy in the world, placed the baby in his mother's arms. The moment Valeria felt the warmth of that fragile little body against her chest, something inside her broke. The tears flowed uncontrollably. She held him as if he were the greatest miracle of her life. Her fingers traced his delicate face, feeling his soft, warm skin. He was so small, so perfect. "My baby, my love." Her voice came out trembling between sobs. The baby moved, settling into her arms, as if he recognized that he was finally in the right place. Doña Rosa cried quietly to one side, covering her mouth with her hand to hold back the tears. Andrés remained silent. He watched the scene without moving. Part of him wanted to leave, to give them space at that moment. But another part couldn't stop watching. That crying, that emotion, that mother and child finally together. He felt a lump in his throat. Something rose up in his throat, something he hadn't let out in years. He quickly looked away, blinking several times, trying to stop his own tears from falling. But deep down, he knew it was too late, because at that moment, something inside him had changed forever. Valeria's soft crying still filled the room. She held the baby with all the care in the world, as if she were afraid he would disappear if she let go for even a second. Doña Rosa ran her hand through her daughter's hair, murmuring sweet words, trying to calm her down, but the emotion was too strong to contain. Andrés stood there quietly, watching everything in silence. The lump in his throat wouldn't go away. His chest felt tight, as if something inside him was trying to get out, something that had been locked away for years. He looked at Valeria, who was still crying, but it was a different kind of cry. It wasn't a cry of pain, it was a cry of relief, of gratitude, of love. Then he understood. Oh, it had been so long since he had seen someone win. Life had always taken everything away from him. Matteo died without him being able to prevent it. He spent years dealing with nameless bodies, interrupted stories, endings without second chances, always the same cycle, always the same pain. But now it was different. He looked at the baby, small and fragile, but alive. Against all odds, against everything they tried to do to prevent it, he was there. Andrés's chest filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. For a long time, the pain of losing Matteo was like an open wound that refused to heal, as if keeping it alive was the only way to remember him, to honor him. But for the first time, he felt something different. Matteo would never come back. But that didn't mean he had to continue living only with pain. He closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath, because for the first time, the wound inside him no longer felt like something that consumed him. It felt like a scar that was finally beginning to close. After so many weeks in that room, breathing the heavy air of uncertainty, Valeria was finally ready to leave. The doctor signed her discharge papers in the morning, and now she was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the baby in her arms with a lost look on her face, as if she were still trying to figure out where to go. Doña Rosa was by her side, full of joy, but also worried. She tried to convince her to go home, but Valeria just looked down, pressing her son against her chest. "Mom, I can't." Doña Rosa frowned. "Why not, daughter? You need a home, a safe place." But it was never safe there. Valeria's voice was low, laden with a weight that no one but she could feel. She looked at Andrés, who was standing near the window, pretending not to listen to the conversation, but attentive to every word. Valeria took a deep breath. "I know you love me, Mom, but I don't want to go back. No, after all, I'm not the same person who left that house months ago, and I don't want my son to grow up surrounded by my past." Silence filled the room. Doña Rosa lowered her head, as if it were a deep cut in her heart. But she understood her daughter. Andrés closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting on everything. He didn't want to get involved. He never did. But something inside him pushed him forward before he could think about it. "You can stay at my house." The words came out before he could filter them. Valeria looked up in surprise. Andrés put his hands in his pockets and looked away until we find a solution. Valeria blinked several times, as if trying to understand if this was real. Doña Rosa looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. "Doctor, are you sure?" He let out a heavy sigh. "I'm not exactly the best person to offer a home, but you have nowhere to go, and I know you won't agree to go back to your mother now." Valeria looked at the baby in her arms, and for the first time in a long time felt that maybe she wasn't alone after all. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Valeria looked at Andrés, trying to understand if he really meant what he said. The offer seemed too good to be true. She never imagined that such a closed-off, distant man could open the doors of his home to someone like her. But then she looked at her son in her arms. He was breathing peacefully, nestled against his mother's chest, unaware of the storm raging around him. Now she had to think about him. She had to give him a better start than she had had. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I accept." Andrés just shook his head, as if it were a mere formality, and not a decision that would completely change his life. The first few days were strange. He was used to living alone, surrounded only by the weight of his own past. Now there was another presence in the house. Valeria spent most of her time taking care of the baby. At night, Andrés would hear crying coming from the other room, followed by her soft voice, singing softly to calm him down. And it was on one of those nights that he discovered it. He was walking down the hall when he heard the sound, a soft strumming of a guitar, and he stopped for a moment, confused. He followed the sound to the living room. Valeria was sitting on the sofa, the guitar on her lap, playing soft chords while the baby slept in her arms. He stood in the doorway without saying anything, just listening. After a while, she noticed his presence and looked at him. "Sorry if I woke you up." "No," he replied, still absorbing the scene. "I didn't know you played." She smiled slightly. She was a music teacher. Before all this happened, Andrés blinked in surprise. Something inside him stirred, as if the past was trying to call him back. Mateo loved the guitar. The memory of his brother came back to him with force. He always had a guitar in his hands, always strumming something, inventing melodies, smiling as if music was all he needed. Andrés looked away and cleared his throat. "You play well." Valeria shrugged. "Music was always a refuge for me." He didn't respond. He just stood there for a moment longer, listening to the soft chords fill the room. And for the first time, his house didn't feel so empty. The days passed slowly, but something inside the house began to change. The silence that had once filled every corner gave way to new sounds. The baby's cries, Valeria's light footsteps in the hallway, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, and above all, the music. Valeria played every night. It was like a silent ritual. After the baby fell asleep, she would pick up her guitar and play soft chords, unhurried, as if each note had something to say. Every time Andrés walked through the living room and saw that scene, Valeria singing softly, the baby breathing peacefully in his crib next to her, he felt something different. One night, as he was putting the guitar away after she had played a few songs, Andrés felt Valeria's gaze on him. When he turned around, he realized that she was looking at him differently, as if she could see something beyond what he was showing. "What's wrong?" he asked, placing the guitar on its stand. She hesitated for a moment, then pointed to his arm. "Your scars." He looked down at the small old cuts scattered across his skin. Some were marks from surgeries, others from accidents, but he knew some were deeper than they appeared. Valeria approached slowly, without rushing, as if she didn't want to scare him. "Each one has a story, right?" Andrés smiled a little, but without joy. "Some I'd rather forget." She was silent for a moment, then ran her fingers gently over one of the scars. "I know what that is." He looked at her. For the first time, he saw his own marks reflected in someone else's eyes. Valeria had her scars too, some visible, others invisible, but all full of pain. "You need a second chance too, Andrés." She held her breath. Her words struck deep, as if they had found a place inside him that he didn't even know existed. For so long he had carried the guilt, the weight of not having saved Mateo, of not having been able to prevent the worst. But there, listening to Valeria, he understood something he had never allowed himself to think. Maybe it was time to stop punishing himself. Maybe it was time to move on. And maybe, just maybe, Valeria was right. The days passed, and Andrés's house was no longer the same. The emptiness that had once filled every corner was gradually being filled with little details. The smell of the coffee Valeria made early in the morning, the sound of the baby murmuring in his crib, the soft melodies that came from the guitar every night. Without realizing it, Andrés grew accustomed to that presence. First to the baby. He no longer avoided holding him so much, and every time he did, he felt that warmth in his chest, that strange sensation he couldn't explain. Then to Valeria. She was different from what he had imagined at first. Strong, but delicate. She carried as much pain as he did, but she never let that define who she was. And when she smiled, even just a little, it seemed like the weight of the past became a little lighter. The connection between them grew every day. Long conversations on the terrace after the baby was asleep, silences that weren't uncomfortable, looks that said more than words. Andrés felt it. He felt that inevitable closeness, but he also felt fear. He had already lost too many people. Every time he thought about allowing himself to feel something stronger, the memory of Mateo came back. The pain of losing his brother was still there, buried deep, waiting for any distraction to come out again. What if it happened again? What if he grew fond of Valeria and the baby, and lost them? The fear was suffocating. He didn't know if he could bear another loss. So every time Valeria looked at him for a moment longer, every time her touch lasted a second longer, he pulled away, built an invisible barrier, shut himself in his own silence. But deep down, he knew that barrier was getting weaker and weaker, and that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to maintain it for long. The night was silent, the baby was already asleep, and the house was immersed in calm. Valeria and Andrés were sitting on the terrace, each lost in their own thoughts. The light wind moved the curtains, bringing a cool breeze that seemed to carry away everything that was left unsaid between them. He looked at the dark sky, avoiding looking directly at her. He wasn't sure what he was feeling. Something inside him pulled him toward her, but at the same time, a part of him insisted on keeping his distance. Valeria watched him with her soft but attentive eyes. She had already noticed. Whenever they got too close, he took a step back. Whenever the silence between them was filled with something stronger, he looked away. She took a deep breath, and in a low voice, almost as if she were afraid of breaking the moment, she whispered, "You saved me, Andrés." He frowned and finally looked at her. "What?" She turned her face toward him, her eyes shining in the dim light of the terrace. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. My son wouldn't be here." He opened his mouth to say something, but she continued. "I know you carry a lot inside you. I know you're afraid to get attached, to allow yourself to feel." He looked away, pressing his fingers against the arm of the chair. "You don't know anything about me, Valeria." She smiled slightly, without taking her eyes off him. "Yes, I do. I see you. I see how hard you try to carry everything on your own." Andrés's chest tightened. He wanted to get up, leave, run away from this conversation that was making him feel so much, but he couldn't. Valeria leaned a little closer to him and whispered, "Now let me save you too." Andrés felt a lump in his throat, because deep down, he knew he needed it more than ever. He had spent his whole life believing that some pains never heal, that certain losses leave gaps so deep that nothing can fill them. But there, sitting on that terrace, feeling her presence beside him, and knowing that a baby was sleeping peacefully in the other room, something inside him began to change. For the first time in years, he realized that he wanted to be there, not just out of obligation, not just because he felt he owed Valeria something for saving her that night in the morgue. He wanted to be there because it made sense, because when he held the baby in his arms and felt its little fingers closing around his, something inside him warmed. Because when he saw Valeria laughing softly as she made breakfast, he felt that his house had never been so full of life. Because after so long, he no longer felt alone. The decision came as something inevitable. He knew it wasn't just an impulse, that it wasn't just a moment. He wanted to stay, and he wanted them to stay. The next day, without saying anything to Valeria, he went to the registry office, filled out the paperwork, and signed the documents. When he returned home, Valeria was in the living room with the baby in her arms, singing softly to him. Andrés paused at the door for a moment, watching her. The baby was growing, getting stronger every day. He had dark, attentive eyes, the same curious gaze of someone who still has a whole world to discover. Valeria noticed he was there and smiled. "How was your day?" He took a deep breath and then said, in a firm voice but full of emotion, "I registered the baby with my last name." Valeria's smile disappeared for a moment. She blinked, confused. "What?" He took a step forward. "Now he has a last name. Mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "Andrés," he swallowed, feeling the weight of his decision become lighter. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running away. "I want to be here, Valeria, with you, with him." She looked at the baby in her arms and then at Andrés. It wasn't just gratitude in her eyes. It was something much bigger, and for the first time, he knew what it was like to have a family. Time passed, and life found its own rhythm. The baby grew strong, with more defined features and eyes curious about the world. Andrés no longer felt strange holding that little one in his arms. On the contrary, now it was natural, as if it had always been that way. That afternoon, the sun shone gently on the square. The wind blew lightly, moving the leaves on the trees and spreading the quiet sound of the city. Children ran across the lawn, old people chatted on the benches, and the world went on without haste. In the center of the square, Valeria sat on a wooden bench with her violin resting on her shoulder. Her fingers glided over the strings with precision, and the melody began to fill the air. It was soft, almost melancholic music, but at the same time, full of hope. Andrés watched her as he rocked the baby in his arms. He felt the little one's slow breathing against his chest, completely comfortable there. He looked at Valeria and felt something growing inside him, something that was no longer fear, but peace. Valeria played with her eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music, which Andrés knew she was not playing just for the sake of playing. She was telling a story. There's the story of someone who survived, the story of someone who found a new beginning, their story. She opened her eyes and looked at him. She smiled. He smiled back, and for the first time he was certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The sound of the violin spreads through the square, floating in the air like a whisper from the past that becomes something new. The wind carries each note, mixing the melody with the laughter of children, the murmur of conversations around them, the whisper of leaves in the trees. But for Andrés, nothing else exists except that moment. He holds the baby in his arms, feeling the warmth of the little body against his own. The child is calm. His curious eyes follow the movement of the world, as if absorbing every detail around him. Andrés hugs him a little tighter, an instinctive, protective gesture. Valeria continues to play. Her eyes shine in the sunlight, a different kind of shine, that of someone who has carried a lot of pain but decided to move on. Every movement of the bow across the strings seems to tell a story. It's not just music, it's life. It's a new beginning. Andrés closes his eyes for a moment and lets the melody envelop him. For the first time in many years, he doesn't feel the weight of guilt. For the first time, the emptiness inside him is gone. He opens his eyes and looks at Valeria. She watches him as she plays, and when their eyes meet, she smiles. He smiles back. There are no more doubts. There is no more fear. They survived. They found something they never imagined they would have again. They found a home. If you were in Andrés's place, could you have shown the same courage? Share your thoughts on the story in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, the video on the screen will affect you even more. It made many people cry and made them think about life. Click on it and get ready for a story that will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for similar stories.